Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tea Time with Tasha. My name is Tasha Berner, and I'm the Assembly member that represents Coastal San Diego in the State Assembly. My podcast is to help you learn about more what's going on in California and the issues that matter most to you. Today's guest comes to us from the 52nd Assembly District. She's a proud immigrant, lifelong public servant, and an advocate for working families. Thank you for joining us, Assemblymember Jessica Caloza.
Thank you, Assemblymember Berner. I'm so excited.
Can I pour you some tea?
Yes,
while we spill the tea? We always think it's going to be very exciting, but we haven't so far learned anything really scandalous yet. So, there's always time for today.
Should we cheers?
We can cheers.
Okay.
Cheers, Jessica.
Cheers to you.
You have such an incredible and dynamic background. For people who don't know you and your background, can you talk about what it was like growing up and how that inspires your work in public service and eventually why you decided to run for office?
Yeah, no, I am, I think, first and foremost, a proud immigrant. My family immigrated here from the Philippines when I was 4, youngest of 6, so I'm the baby in the family. Now have 13 nieces and nephews, but that's really what's defined my entire career is really, what programs, what things did my family rely on when we immigrated here from the Philippines to get to where we started to where we are today. So I came here without speaking a word of English.
Oh, wow.
My sister, while she was working at a fast food place, they were all too busy to teach me English, bought me a used hooked-on phonics set from the Penny Saver. It was like, match the tapes with the books, and you learn English. And so for me, how we went from that to where we are now at Tea Time for Tasha is really been a huge blessing, but so much of that had to do with my family's, success story and how we were able to navigate government.
Yeah.
And really, that's really the safety net for so many immigrant families is where do they go when they need help? And it's us. It's the programs that we create.
Yeah.
And that's what drives me in my work and why I wanted to go into this, because it's about service.
Yeah.
And it's about making government work better for everybody, like what I know you have dedicated your life to. So thank you for doing that.
Actually, I did a whole thing in the private sector and made money before I came here. So that's what I did. But I think we've had this conversation.
Yeah.
My aunt by marriage is Filipino.
That's right.
And she came here, I want to say it was right around when I was born. I don't know if it was a year or two before I was born or a year or two afterwards. But she came here from the Philippines. And she's like my favorite aunt. Sorry.
I think that's juicy tea right there.
That is, I know. I'm going to be getting hate texts after this from Marilyn and Roseanne, so sorry, guys. But she's one of my favorite aunts, and I remember she would tell me about her life growing up in the Philippines, because she was older when she came. And granted, it was a different time period, right? I'm 52 now, so this is like in the early 70s when she came. And so, but it was this idea of like, as a country of immigrants, how do we lift up immigrant stories and families and support them? Because that's where I think a lot of our creativity and our innovation in California also comes from. And we sometimes, in the whole rhetoric that we hear, we forget that part, right? Is this creativity, is this idea that together from these different perspectives, we create something that's better and different, right?
No, absolutely. And, LA, San Diego, that's one of the through lines, I think, for both of our districts, is we have and represent communities that are so rich with diverse immigrant communities, and they are what make up so many of our industries. For me, being Filipina, I'm the first Filipina in the state legislature, and our community had so many impacts during COVID. About a third of the nurses in California are Filipina.
I didn't know that.
Yes, and so many of them, unfortunately, were impacted, and many of them passed away during the pandemic. And so now what we have is also a nursing shortage because of what happened. And so we have whole communities that make up all these industries, whether it's healthcare or our long-term caregivers, most of whom are women of color. And, I think that's what I feel very proud to represent in this role, is how do we tell their stories through the policy that we make. And that's been really important for me. My mom was a caregiver She also was a child care provider, and then she retired as a mother baby nurse. And so I get to draw from her stories all the time, but that's what shapes me.
Yeah, when I was a kid, my aunt had a daycare center.
Oh.
Yeah. So, yeah, and she had a love for she has a love for gardening. I love that. I have that too. But one of the things is like that story and that experience has led you to public service, and you've served, if I understand correctly, at every level of government, like the federal, the state, the local. You've done everything. So, what's been your most pinch me moment in public service so far?
I feel very lucky. I've had a few. The most recent one being sworn in here in the state assembly. I got to bring my mom and my dad to the assembly floor. Yeah. My mom, obsessed with her phone and just is on Facebook all the time. And she was, I think, probably Facebook streaming me the entire time. So there's this photo where I have my hand up, and you can't see my mom's face because her giant phone is in front of it. But I think it's just so, emblematic of these times that we're in, and how they've been changing, the progress too that we've made, that we came from the Philippines and now we're here at the state capitol. Yeah. That was definitely a big pinch me moment for me, because I want to represent not just my community, but so many communities that haven't yet gotten to sit where we sit on the assembly floor. That was a big one. I think another proud moment for me was when I was a public works commissioner. I got sworn in and got to do a lot of really incredible things. I got to wear a hard hat and construction boots all the time, got to work on infrastructure projects, and so much of the work that we do is around policy and legislation and budgets. So you don't physically get to touch anything, but when you're out in the field and you get to build a bridge, build a building, it has a different impact, and that work I really love and I really, really enjoy.
I came from local government, and one of the things, I was only there and on the city council for 2 years, but I loved how immediate it was. And I knew when I ran for assembly, I knew we were making policies, they had to get implemented, it would be a longer trajectory. Everybody I knew who was supporting me, they told you it's a longer timeline. You have to be okay with that, because I like seeing the fruit of my labor, right? That's something that I get a lot of satisfaction from. And so it is hard when you do something and then 5 years later you're like, a win, But that's also what we do. And if we don't have the long term, our local governments can't do what they do to serve our communities.
I will say something, obviously you're doing an incredible job. For everyone who's watching, we all know that you're the chair of our Communications and Conveyance Committee. Assemblymember Berner does an incredible job as chair, but one of the things that you've also, I think, do an incredible job bringing into the committee is how do we look back at the implementation of the things that we've passed and ensuring that they actually happen.
Yes.
So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Yeah, I lived in Germany for 12 years, and I'm far too efficient to let things go. And it's hard because why, once you've been in the state bureaucracy, you see why there are delays. But normal people, I always call them normal people problems. Normal people don't care that there are delays. Yeah. They see that they can't get food. They see that they have potholes. They see that their internet doesn't work, right? That's what they see. They don't care about the bureaucrocy behind it. And so I think it's part of our job as legislators to go out and be pushing them to do better. Because that's I always tell kids when I talk to them about what we do, I say there's always two answers in civics. It is executive, legislative, and judicial branch of government, 3 branches of government, and checks and balances. Those are the 2 principles. Those are the answers to most civics questions, are those 2 things. And our job is the literal check and balance of the legislative on the executive, right? That is part of our job. And so it's not just a civics lesson, it's what we get to practice every day. So thank you for saying that. I do, it's not always an easy part of the job because it kind of feels like you're going in and being the bad guy sometimes. But it's an important part of the job, and I think our constituents elected us to do that. So, but just like me, I think you're a proud product of public schools and a lifelong advocate for equity. What's one lesson from your childhood or school years that still guides you today?
It's a tough one.
You can choose 2.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely, because I come from such a big family and, at least in my big Filipino family, it doesn't matter if it's your cousin's cousin problem or, even if it's your neighbor, it somehow becomes your problem.
Yes.
And so I think under that framework, when you are operating within a larger body and somebody is facing an issue or a tough problem, and you try to approach it from that lens of like, how can we really like help address this issue and solve it together as, a unit, as a family, is how I like to think of, how can we problem solve together? Because you can't do it on your own. And I've learned that very quickly in the assembly. And so I think that's a lesson that I definitely bring in here. It's like, you have all these siblings, right? There's 80 of us.
It's more of a dysfunctional family most of the time, but that's a nice way to look at it.
And so how do you tackle these large issues together within these body, right? You have to work with each other no matter what. So I would say that's definitely one lesson. And I think too, it's just knowing how lucky we are to do this work. I try to stay really grounded in my roots and my family and how we came here and how far we've come. And so I think really putting it in that context, even though we have, stressful days and we also have really good days, that we're still incredibly blessed to do this work because we can do a lot of good.
Yeah.
And
my favorite days are days where I get to do my podcast.
Those are my new favorite days too. I will be your sign up to be your assistant or your intern.
Oh no, you're so good. On the thing of jobs, you are the assistant majority whip. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes. So I had this job for 2 years.
Yes.
And I loved it. And I know at the time I had Todd Gloria, who's now the mayor of San Diego, and he was the majority whip. And when he left, he's like, "You're a little bit too much iron fist and not enough velvet glove, Tasha." And I was like, "Thanks, Todd." And so it's one of the things that always stuck with me. How are you finding it balancing being the assistant majority whip? What's been the most exciting thing you've seen or done so far? Or what do you like about it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think for me, it gives me an opportunity to talk to everybody on the floor. About different issues and really getting to know everyone, and also understanding that, my district where I represent in Los Angeles and South Glendale and East LA is very different from, your district and someone else's district. And so even though we may not agree or they may not, want to vote on certain issues or may not agree what the recommendation is, when people say, well, this is really how my district feels about this issue, and you have to respect that. And I think when it comes from that place, we can walk away knowing that, we can agree to disagree professionally, but at the end of the day, let's try to find issues that we can work on together. So I, appreciate getting to walk around and move on the floor. So that's a lot of fun. And, I think when I don't know what to do, I'll just ask myself, what would Tasha do in this moment? So we sit very close to each other. Exactly. So I feel very fortunate that I get to sit next to people on the floor that have been in these positions before. And I get to ask you all questions about like, how did you handle this situation? And that there's a wealth of knowledge of everybody there that I can draw from.
Yeah, I mean, I think I like the role also because I did get to build relationships with people that were outside of a bill context, right? It was a procedural context.
Yes.
So that was really interesting, and exactly what you said. What is their district? Why do they have that, why do they have that position? And that was just interesting. You don't always get that up here. People think we do, but we don't always get that kind of interaction, and I thought that was good. And I hate sitting still, right? Like I'm always wandering around somewhere anyway, so I was like, might as well do it for a purpose,
Yes.
But when we look at it, so that's your job, but you also have a bill package. You hit the ground running in the assembly. What are your big issues you're most fired up to tackle this year, and why do they matter so much to you?
Yeah, I would say top of mind for me is definitely around disaster recovery. So I represent District 52, which is just on the edge of Assemblymember Harabedian's district. So we're right next to Pasadena and Altadena. And so we had residents evacuated, especially in South Glendale. I was personally about a block away from the fires. And so, the aftermath, now that the fires are out, the impacts in my district are, for instance, in our school system, a lot of the students who unfortunately schools burned down in Altadena, they are now going to school in my district. People are looking for housing also in my district.
Yeah.
And so the impact looks different. So I have some bills around disaster recovery, AB 262, which is around individual assistance, so that we can build our own, FEMA-like program at the state level, because we know that we need to build our own programs. We can't rely on the federal government for disaster recovery, especially for disasters that don't always get declared a federal disaster by FEMA.
Yeah.
And so that's really important to me, and it gives direct cash assistance to families for what they need to pay for.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing, because I think people always think about the big disasters that do get declared as,
Yes.
under the national FEMA rules, but there are disasters that don't qualify for that. And then what do we do about that, and how do we help families recover from those? They're equally traumatic.
They are. They are. And a lot of, especially rural cities and counties would benefit from this, and a lot of smaller cities. So it's a bill that's also sponsored by the League of Cities. I also have another bill, AB 265, which is the Small Business and Nonprofit Recovery Act, which is sponsored by the Small Business Agency, SBDA, Development Agency. And, that's really to create the infrastructure for a fund to support small businesses and nonprofits who, so many of them, pay out of pocket to help during a disaster. And then we don't really have a vehicle to make them whole, or they already needed help before the disaster. So those are some disaster related ones. And I would say some of the other priorities, especially given the district that I represent in Los Angeles, is really around homelessness and housing. Yeah. And so, I'm proud to be one of the co-authors on the housing bond, which is really important. And then also around homelessness, working to create some dedicated resources in LA County so that direct service providers actually manage, a telephone line to be able to help people in need, our unhoused neighbors, and also give a resource directly to small businesses, to residents, to be able to call if they need somebody, if they run into somebody who needs help.
Yeah. And I think those are really heavy issues when we think, your freshman class, especially those from LA, came in and got thrown into really difficult times. The biggest thing that I had happen was my first day when I got sworn in, I had a for-profit higher education institution close. I didn't even have keys to my district office, and I had casework. I had hired a chief. I don't even think I had anybody else on the staff.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to do. So I can't even imagine having the fires and such large fires, such an, national disaster affecting. And that's going to probably shape most of your career because you're coming in that way.
Yeah.
And so, you've also tackled other issues, gun violence prevention, equal pay, climate action. So when you're not in work mode, what do you do to recover? What do you do to decompress?
Yeah, I think, I think for me, being outside helps a lot because we are in the office a lot. We're in committee rooms for hours on end. We're sitting down a lot. So I think for me, going for a walk, going hiking in the outdoors helps grounds me and putting my phone away and just really just getting to be still for a second. Mm-hmm. So, for me, that helps. And I'm learning a lot about how do we integrate wellness into our everyday, and you're a big proponent of that. Yes, and so I get a lot of tips from you about, how do we keep ourselves, in a place where we're still mentally healthy, physically healthy. All those things really matter because it bleeds into our work if we're not taking care of ourselves.
Yeah. And I think what people often forget on the outside is these heavy issues are emotionally draining for us when we care.
So draining. Yeah.
And so I'm a big proponent. I actually worked out before 8 a.m. this morning.
Oh my gosh.
I know. No one believes it.
I believe you.
No, I think the only people that know are the people at the gym, you know. I should have gotten a witness, affidavit, somebody like, she was there. But yeah, working out and meditation and walk. So we're going to have to do a walk later.
Yeah, you should do tea time with Tasha, like on a walk.
On
like
a walk?
Walk edition.
We're going to see if we can figure out
to
the
go
technology for
tea.
that. We're gonna tea to walk. Okay, I think that all I can think about is golf analogies, like tea time, But that is so great, and I think, thank you so much for sharing with me and our listeners about your experience, because I think when we think of LA, we don't always think about the Filipino community. When we think about healthcare, we don't always think about the Filipino community, and so I think you being here, the first Filipino elected, is such a huge thing.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you for all of your support.
Yes,
And,
of course.
you know,
of course, I was happy to support.
I also want to point out, can I point out a fun fact?
Yeah. Oh, I
Okay.
don't know.
Because I'm a listener on this
Okay.
podcast, so I have a fun fact to share with
Okay,
you.
yeah, what's the fun fact?
The fun fact is, so far you have interviewed all women of color.
Have I?
Yeah, you have.
Except there was one where I was interviewed, and I'm white.
Well, you've interviewed all women.
Yes, I've interviewed all women. Yes, that's true.
These are both
And
great
when
fun
I- when
facts.
I was
yourself
interviewed-
does not. Yourself, you know.
Yeah.
But I
That's
thought that
fine.
was a great.
Yeah,
When I
I
was
don't
looking
know.
at everyone you interviewed, I was
Yeah.
like, wow. And I don't think you even realized that you did it.
I didn't. No, I didn't. I didn't realize it. I didn't realize that. Oh, that's an interesting thing.
Well,
I
thank
don't know.
you for uplifting
Oh,
the
yeah.
voices of women in the
Yeah.
assembly.
Yes. Well, I think when we look at it, it's when I came in, there were many fewer women.
Yeah.
And I felt like we were trying to find our space. And now we're not quite at parity, but we're getting really close. And you can just feel on the floor and in committee that difference
Yeah.
that women make, and women of all types and all backgrounds, and how we do things differently. And I think it's something that's been lacking in leadership and what we're really bringing to the table. And I can't wait to see what your leadership will show us all in the next couple of years.
Thank you.
Jessica. And so thank you for tuning in. Feel free to like, subscribe, comment, and share with everybody you know. But until next time, stay curious, California.